Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Foundation Directory Online, FDO for short. For those of you who are returning grants-based webinar participants, a warm welcome back. And to those of you here for the first time, I'm so glad that you're joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Cevada, and I'm a program associate here at Candid. And today I'll be supporting the webinar by managing polls, as well as collecting questions that you ask along the way and posing them during our Q&A. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we want to share with you that on February 1st, we joined forces with GuideStar to become Candid. Together, we have over 88 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. Through research, collaboration, and training, Candid connects people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do it. With Candid, you can find funding with Foundation Directory Online and search 140,000 funders and 12 million grants. And you can increase your visibility with the funder community by creating or maintaining your GuideStar nonprofit profile. You can also continue to strengthen your nonprofit by participating in grants-based trainings to move your fundraising skills to the next level. To learn more about our capacity building training programs, you can visit grantspace.org. We offer courses across the country at a location near you. I would now like to turn the controls over to our presenter, Ganga Dharmapa. And as I do so, I'd like to go ahead and introduce her a little bit. So Ganga is our community outreach manager for Candid, overseeing our Western region. And as such, she leads many of our trainings, including our proposal writing bootcamp, outcome thinking course, and she'll be leading us through today's training.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone. This is Introduction to FDO, as Elizabeth mentioned, and FDO stands for Foundation Directory Online. It is a research tool produced by Candid, formerly known as Foundation Center and GuideStar. My name is Ganga Dharmapa. I'm the Community Outreach Manager based out of Candid's office on the West Coast. So I'm joining you from San Francisco, Oakland today. And today's webinar, we will be talking about lots of things connected to FDO, specifically how to find funders for your nonprofit. And what we're going to be covering today is, hopefully, when you've completed this webinar, you should be able to explain what Foundation Directory Online actually is. You should also be able to identify your needs before you start searching, find grant prospects with a project-based approach, and we're going to be talking about that project-based approach soon, and decide if those prospects are indeed a good fit for your needs. We'll also cover where you can access Foundation Directory Online and how you can get help to use it if you need it. But first, we're going to be doing a quick poll just to get a sense of who's on the webinar today. So I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, who's going to help us with our poll. Take it away, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much, Ganga. So the question that we're posing to you right now is, how do you currently search for funders? And that might be through a search online, whether it's through a search engine, pick your favorite, or perhaps you're looking at requests for proposals or RFPs. It may be possible that you're using GuideStar as a tool to find potential prospects, and maybe you're keeping it tried and true by going through 990 tax forms. And if you are selecting other, we'd love for you to specify that other means of doing so in the chat. And this is a select all that applies. So if multiple of these are techniques that you're using, go ahead and select as many as you currently use. And our overwhelming winner is by doing an online search with 86%. It looks like some folks are taking advantage of RFPs with 32%. 16% of the room is searching on GuideStar, and 9% of the room is looking at 990s. And for those of you who did submit through the chat, it looks like Michael actually hasn't started just yet. So Michael, you're in the right place at the right time, because we're going to help you with this process. And Rose says she chose other because she's also new. And Jan is sharing that in her new role as a grant writer, she's also brand new to the searching for funders. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to you, Ganga, so you can let us know what you think of these results.
Great. That is really interesting. And I think you're all off to a great start and you're in the right place. So let's talk a little bit about some of these different ways of searching for funders right now that you're currently using. So it seemed like a lot of you were searching online. That is a great place to start. And just some things to keep in mind, less than 10% of foundations actually have websites. So not even Google can help you find a foundation website if it doesn't exist. So just something to think about, but it's a place to start for sure. And you're sometimes left gathering clues from news clips or other organizations' donor lists too when you start out searching online. So although a lot of us start that way, it's not necessarily the most ideal place to begin. Some of you might have thought about looking for RFPs. And in case you don't know what RFP stands for, it stands for Requests for Proposals. And this is, again, a fair place to begin. It's just something to consider is that less than half of 1% of foundations actually publish their requests for proposals because foundations aren't legally required to issue them. So some foundations are very thoughtful in using the RFP approach, but it's not necessarily the process that everyone follows. So an RFP is a great way of approaching a foundation if it's out there, but a lot of them don't publish RFPs or actually reach out in the same way. And so this definitely isn't a comprehensive view of the whole foundation giving. And then many of you might be searching GuideStar, which is amazing because Candid is a newly formed entity of GuideStar and Foundation Center. And we love GuideStar, it's a great product, and its profiles are designed for transparency. One thing to consider is that it's not necessarily designed as a grant-seeking tool for analysis. So you won't always find the grants data, application guidelines, or other information like giving limitations or even LinkedIn profile connections that maybe you're looking for. But it's, again, a good place to start. So there's no real wrong answer here of place that you're searching for funders right now. It's just a good sense of considering what else you might be wanting to do. And then some of you might be looking at 990s, which are IRS tax forms that foundations are required to file, as well as nonprofits. Foundations, private foundations file 990 PFs, and nonprofit organizations file 990s. In order to find 990s, you first need to know a foundation's name. So again, that's one limitation of going just the 990 route. And some other drawbacks are that 990s are there and they could just show 1 year's worth of grants data. So you cannot analyze trends in the same way unless you collect 10 years worth of 990s, and it's a lot of paperwork. And they have a lot of unneeded information that sometimes you don't necessarily need. And so it is something that you could use, but it's not necessarily searchable. So, I know I've pointed out some of the limitations of these different approaches. So you might be wondering, okay, how can I find potential funders who don't have websites, who don't publish RFPs per se, or who maintain GuideStar profiles, but they are giving grants every year for work like mine? How do I actually do that? Great question. And so I wanted to highlight that the answer is Foundation Directory Online. And many of you, everyone actually probably on this webinar today, signed up because you're interested in Foundation Directory Online. So by using Foundation Directory Online, FDO we call it, it's a searchable web-based tool that lets you find funders faster. So you can spend more time on building relationships with them. And that's really the intention of really using it as a prospect research tool so that you can find those rich data sets. So rich data sets on US and international philanthropy, and it is unsurpassed in many different areas. So it is unsurpassed in scope. FDO has more than 140,000 funder profiles and more than 1 million recipient records. And funder types in FDO include private foundations, which I just mentioned, community foundations, public charities, corporate giving programs, international grant makers outside the US, and federal agencies as well. So it includes a lot of this different data. And then FDO is also surpassed in depth. So FDO has detailed profiles for funders, grant recipients, and companies. And in a few minutes, I'm going to actually show you FDO so you get a sense of what you could potentially do with it. And last but not least, FDO is unsurpassed in currency. It is updated daily with profiles and new grant records changing daily. In addition, more than 1,000 funders actually send their grants data directly to FDO so that grant seekers can access that information sooner. So when you look in FDO, you might see grants data for 2019, and usually that means that a funder is sending data directly to FDO so that you have access to the most current and updated information. So we really love FDO, and I hope that you will too after you take a look at some of the things that you could do. And a little bit about data sources. So for the majority of funders, FDO's data, you might be wondering, where does it actually come from? It actually comes from Forms 990, but it also uses a variety of other sources to inform its profile. So I mentioned that some funders report directly to FDO, also using 990, but it is using additional resources. So it's not limited to the 990. It's using grantmaker websites, annual reports, published application guidelines, philanthropic press, federal government grant that have been issued, excuse me, and 30 plus other information sources. And also a real big highlight is that direct reporting from the grant makers. So you might be wondering, okay, you told me all about this great tool. Are we ready to start searching FDO? And the answer is not quite yet. We want to take a step back because I know it's really exciting to jump right into the database, but you want to do a little bit of that due diligence and planning and thinking before you jump into a database, because it can be really overwhelming if you don't necessarily know what to look for before you start searching. So before you start searching, first, I really encourage you to have a clear idea of the actual project that you want to fund. And so if you don't have a clear idea of specific projects, maybe it could be a few different projects. Usually in the nonprofit sector, we're all looking for multiple kinds of funding. It'll take your research to a different level if you are focused. And you also get a lot more prospects if you can think differently to describe your project. So you don't necessarily want to get stuck in describing it one way. You want to think kind of bigger picture of, okay, here are other terms that maybe will be used to describe my project. This is the scope of what it actually is. So here are 3 questions to help you brainstorm different descriptions. Who are you serving? This is really about your community served, that question that we often see in proposals of your target population, community served, community reach, that kind of thing. You want to think about that. The community served, people that you're serving, not necessarily the nonprofit itself. You are thinking about ultimately who is your target population. So whether that is kids living in a particular area who have a specific need, like maybe it's after school care, after school programs. And then another thing you want to think about is where are those kids located? So maybe you're doing the work in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so you want to answer that question first and not say, well, we want to just look at all funders funding everywhere, because no, you want to think about where's the work actually happening, where's it being done, and what are you specifically doing for them? So what is it that your organization does, but specifically, what is that program or project specific work about? So what are you providing for them? So after you've kind of taken a moment to answer these questions, and I would recommend that you actually do this with your colleagues and take a step back and say, who are we actually serving? Where is our community located? And it could be, we're really located locally, or maybe the community served is actually located in India. It all depends. What are you doing for them? And so after you've answered that, you might say, okay, now I've answered these questions. Are we ready to start searching for funding? And the answer is yes, you are. And the first thing that I want to talk about, I'm going to show you Foundation Directory Online in a moment, is that you want to begin with this project-based search. So I'm going to show my screen, and you're going to actually look at Foundation Directory Online here, which is a really wonderful tool. So I mentioned before that we're going to be looking at a particular example. So I talked about maybe you're an after-school care program for children in Minneapolis. So I did this, I typed this in earlier, but this is what you get when you look at Foundation Directory Online, the professional version. You can use natural language searching and type in anything like ballet school in New York or domestic violence shelters in San Francisco. And for our purposes today, I'm going to say health after school program for children in Minneapolis. And some things to note is that you can do an advanced search in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and click the search bar. And here you can see many useful things. So at the top, it shows our results. And the terms that we used a term called after school program, but you can see that this database is actually using terms that are related and connected to how funders are describing the work and also how nonprofits are describing the work. So out of school learning is a term that's actually related to this. So that popped up here, as well as health, child welfare, program support, and Minneapolis, as well as children and youth and academics. And at the very top, before you even kind of scroll down, if you feel like I want to eliminate some of these terms, you can simply hover over the little X mark and you can edit there. And so we can, modify our search as needed. And what we see here is that our results, the initial results of this search, pulled up 379 different funders, 2,998 grants. And these are grants that were previously awarded, historical grants that are really useful for our prospecting to see trends. And then recipients. So we have 374 recipients. And now, what you can also do within this database is maybe you want to do an advanced search. And I began with that first initial toolbar where I just kind of typed in, but you can jump directly into the advanced search. So if you feel like, oh, I want to put my own terms in there, this is what it looks like. So you can kind of skip over that and go directly to the advanced search feature. And here you see what those terms actually look like. So in our subject area, this is really how the work is falling and how it's connected to how we were describing it. We have the terms out of school learning, health, child welfare, geographic focus that's been listed is Minneapolis, and population served, and these are all pre-populated based on my initial results and my initial searching, children and youth. And so at any point I can delete these terms. I can reselect and search from additional criteria here. And I can also do something which I think is pretty cool, is I can match any of the terms or I can match all of the terms. And I would encourage you to keep it at match any, because you want to do a broader search and the broadest search possible. Because sometimes what you'll find is when you do match all, you will be looking for a search criteria that's looking for all these terms together, which may be what you want, but you also want to see what work is kind of intersecting in these different ways. So right now we have 379 grant makers or funders that have shown up, and that might feel like an overwhelming amount, but it's not necessarily, and we'll get to that in a moment. And at the very least, I think it is really important to highlight both subject area and geographic focus, because a majority of grants data will have those two key items. And a lot of people begin with that search where they're thinking about, okay, what does the work look like? How does it fall? How is it kind of fitting into the language that funders and nonprofits are using? And where am I doing the work? So at the very least, you want to begin there. And I wanted to highlight a couple things here. So under grant makers, at any point, if I only want to view the grant makers, I can click view grant makers only. If I only want to look at the grant details in particular, I can click on that here underneath. And if I only want to look at recipients, I can also click on that too. And you can also look at those 990 tax forms. So if you're burning to look at those 990 tax forms, you can also look at those that are available. However, FDO has made it much easier for you to kind of search so you don't have to dig through those tax forms, but they are available to you if you're interested. And so in the grant maker list, what you can see here is that the top 5 funders that match your particular search criteria. And if you're wondering, what is my search criteria? It is out of school learning, health, child welfare in Minneapolis, and population served, children and youth, academics. We can see the top 5 funders based on their grant count. So who is awarding the most number of grants based on your particular search criteria. And you can see here, and this is really interesting, because we are including federal data as well, the United States Department of Health and Human Services happens to be one of the largest funders for this particular issue in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then we have the General Mills Foundation, the Minneapolis Foundation, Otto Bremer Trust, the McKnight Foundation, and we have over 10 pages of that data. So if I wanted to look at all of the grants data, the grantmaker data, I can click on that particular list, and here's what I get. I get all these organizations looking here. And you'll notice, and this is why I mentioned the grant count at the very end here, this is really important to focus on, because you might think 379 funders, that is a whole lot of funders. And I don't know if I want to approach all of them. And the answer is you don't have to. So you can see, okay, the top 5 definitely helpful, but the grant count decreases significantly. So maybe you're not necessarily going to be approaching an organization here at the bottom unless you have a previous relationship with them, or it makes sense for you. But if they're giving out just 5 grants, the chances of you getting a grant like that, it's still possible, but the chances decrease significantly. So I wanted to highlight that, and you can kind of expand the list in the same way for those other categories. But grant count is a really important feature here. I'm going to go back to the previous screen just so you can get a sense of a couple of other features that I wanted to highlight. So within this database, you can also do a couple of other things. So we did, that search before, and it's populating here. You can also click here in the additional filters. So I'm just going to show you that. I'm going to expand that. And here you can see that another area has been populated based on our description of program. So program support is a support strategy. And that makes sense to include here because that's the type of support that we're ultimately looking for, is that project-based search and that program support. And I can also do things like I can unclick this box of including federal funders. So yes, maybe I am looking at federal grants, but maybe I already have grants from Department of Health and Human Services, and I want to just look at those private sources of funding. So I can maybe unclick that. I can also choose to unclick any of these different categories of program support, or if I want to broaden my search even more, although I think this is, a pretty good amount of data that we have, I could unclick any of those areas in population served. And another really great and cool feature is that I can limit it by years. And so right now it's searching 2003 to 2019. But just say I want to look a little bit more recent information. I want to exclude some of those funders that maybe gave more than 10 years ago. So I'm going to narrow it down to 2012 to 2019, which gives us a better scope of who most recently supported this work that is similar to ours. And now we see that the grant count has definitely decreased, as well as the grants have decreased, as well as recipients and grant makers as well. Not by a lot, so it means there's still lots of grant makers within that period of 2012 to 2019 that are funding the work. And you can see that the top 5 grant makers is now also excluding those government grant makers. So it's all depending on, what type of funding you're looking for. I would encourage you to make sure that tab is not checked, because you want to be open to basically any type of funding that's out there. So if it is a government grant maker, great. But this is really in the case of we already have that kind of funding. We want to see what private funding is available here. And so I'm going to go back and talk about a few other aspects that you want to consider before we look deeply into a funder profile. So I'm going to go back to our presentation. So we answered those 3 questions. And now we want to think about evaluating prospects for strong or weak fit. And you might be wondering, how do I do that? And so what you want to ultimately think about is a couple of questions. So 5 questions, not necessarily a couple. 5 questions that you want to really highlight. And that is, do I meet this funder's guidelines and requirements? And we won't know that until we look at a funder's profile, but you also want to think about, we don't want to ever ignore a section on limitations. So if they say, yes, we are funding this particular area, but we're only funding in Minneapolis, or we're only funding in the state of Minnesota, that may not be applicable if you're doing youth programming, working with kids in out of school time in Atlanta, Georgia. So do I meet this funder's requirements? They may list a lot of different things, like we don't fund in this particular area. So maybe they fund the type of work you do, but not necessarily what you need at this moment. And then another thing that you want to think about, is my mission or project's goal a priority for this funder? So when we go back to look at this particular information, I want you to look at those data trends, because that's something that you're going to be able to see. Is this really a fit? So, based on a search, you may get a funder and think, oh, wow, looks like a compelling fit. But then you might realize, oh, their priority is hospitals and libraries, and we're a small nonprofit organization, and we're not necessarily aligned with what they do, but maybe they funded organizations like mine in the future. And another thing you want to think about are, how big are their grants? So if their grants average between $1,000 and $5,000, that's great. It might mean you're a good fit for that, but maybe you're really trying to go after more money and you want to see in general how big are their grants, what's the scope, what are the trends that you want to think about. And then, does this funder support organizations like mine? And this is really where it is important to know the landscape of your nonprofit work in advance. And I can't stress this enough, because if you don't know who else is doing the work like yours, you're not necessarily, one, going to be able to partner with them, but you're not going to be able to see the ways in which they were successful, or you can learn from their experiences too. So you want to know the organization, the other players in the field, and ideally you're collaborating with them and you know who else is working in the youth development space in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Who else is working in the domestic violence space in San Francisco Bay Area. And ideally you kind of have a sense of who's an organization similar to yours, how are you different, etc. I stress this because, again, sometimes it's overwhelming to do the research, especially when we're a new organization or a smaller organization. We don't necessarily know who our potential allies and partners are. So does this funder support organizations like mine? You have to know who those organizations potentially are. Do I know anybody associated with this particular funder? So that's something to consider. And I will show you a feature in the database where you can actually see, you can have your LinkedIn profile open and you can see the who's who section and see what your connections are, or you can see who has a public LinkedIn profile available. And that's one way of connecting with them, to see what your connections are. It's not always the best approach. Sometimes there are different approaches, but it's really great to see, like, oh, I know this person, or I've met them at a conference, or maybe it makes sense to connect in this way, or their limitations indicate that there's another process. So ask yourself these questions first and have them in your mind before you go into the database, because it is easy to get overwhelmed and just kind of get lost, but it's really great to kind of guide yourself in this specific way. So let's jump back into Foundation Directory Online. So I'm going to go ahead and come back here. And so we saw a great list of funders here. And I wanted to show you one particular funder profile. So you can click on any of those potential funders that you see here. And I clicked on the Otto Bremer Trust, and this is showing me the most recent 5 years at a glance, and it's going to give me a lot of information. And this is, again, based on my original search of the after school health program in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I'm going to take you through this profile. And at the top, you can see that they do have a website. So a lot of foundations have websites, a lot don't, many more don't. We mentioned only 10% do, but this is an organization that has a website. When possible, after you look at a profile, if you feel like this is a potential prospect, if you send yourself results, save results, I'll show you how to do that, check out their website. Don't ignore a website if something exists. And then you can jump directly to who's who and contact information if you want. But I'm going to kind of show you some trends, and this is really helpful, and it's a wonderful tool in Foundation Directory Online because you get a sense of this funder in terms of their giving historically. So it's not just what happened this year or last year, it is giving over time. And this is really helpful for us because we learn a lot more about the funder. And keep in mind that each funder is going to do a lot of due diligence and homework about the nonprofits they fund. So you want to make sure that you're actually returning the favor and doing your homework as well about the funder. And so we see here on the left-hand side, we're looking at the subject areas in greater detail. What is being funded? So the top subject area is human services. So we're pretty much looking at this profile thinking, is there a reason to eliminate this funder? Or are they not funding what I'm funding? Or am I getting excited because maybe they're a potential fit? So human services, I feel like that still fits in our criteria of our search. Health is next, community and economic development, education, public safety, human rights, philanthropy, and the list goes on. So that is something that's really helpful. And you can actually drill down into each of those if you wanted to go deeper and see what do they mean by human services in greater detail. For the purposes of today, I'm not going to take you down there, but you can really do some deep diving and research here into those different subject areas if you wanted. And then at a glance, where is that money going? You can see that even though we limited our search to Minneapolis, Minnesota, funding is and has gone in different parts of the country. So obviously the number of grants in Minnesota is quite high based on our search results, but you can see they've also funded North Dakota, they funded Iowa, South Dakota, Wisconsin. So if you happen to be searching and maybe your work isn't happening directly in Minnesota, maybe it crosses state lines, or you have a partner that's located in North Dakota or Wisconsin, you might say, hey, have you heard of this particular organization? How big are the grants? This gives you each grant with a little bit more detail, so you know that their grants really are a range. The largest grant they actually give is somewhere in the range of 50 to 100, or the most number of grants in this area. So that's great news if you're looking for a larger amount. They have also given grants, upwards of $1 million and really small grants of $5,000. So you want to think about that. But you can see here that the most common grant amount, this is the average grant amount, is $25,000, which is pretty substantial. And you might be wondering, what range do I ask for it? It really depends on a couple of factors based on what organizations are also doing the work like yours and looking at their grants data. So we can see here, and I wanted to also highlight on the left-hand side, we have a jump to screen. I like to use this when I want to get information quickly about one of these areas, but you can also scroll through to kind of take it a little bit slower and see what this information actually looks like. So the most common grant amount is $25,000, and you can see we actually have 2019 data. And this is really helpful and important. And you can see that the organization that got a $115,000 grant in 2019 was Perspectives Inc. And you might think, oh, I know that organization, I want to look them up. You can. So you can actually click on that recipient data if you wanted to actually see what that was for. You're not going to get, a copy of their proposal per se, but you're going to get general information that can be helpful to you. So let's actually click on that to see, what comes up. So here we see we get information about Perspectives Inc. We get a general description. We see what their subject areas are and the grant amount here, which is really helpful for us here. And also where else they're doing the work. So geographic areas served. They also do work beyond just the Minnesota, St. Paul area. So coming back to the profile here, we can see a lot of information here, and it's going by year and also grant amount. So the largest grant amount awarded, and this is helpful, and this is great for us to have that information that is most current and relevant. And then we can also see funding interest. This is really helpful and important for our particular searching. We want to see how else do they describe the work? What else do they actually fund? So they fund basic and emergency aid, child educational development. So I think that kind of connects with our original search category. So we're still potentially looking at this as an organization. Geographic focus, you can see here, they're not necessarily focusing only on Minnesota and North Dakota, etc. Support strategies, they do a lot of different support strategies, including program support. That's how we came up in the search. capacity building, technical assistance, and they're an independent foundation. And then here, the purposes and activities. The mission of the foundation is to assist people in achieving full economic, civic, and social participation in and for the betterment of their communities. And you can also find out more about their background here, as well as program areas, investments, etc. And a really cool feature that, again, there's so many great features in Foundation Directory Online. This is actually one of my favorites. And this is other funders to consider. So this is based on a pattern of giving that's connected to the subject area, geographic area served, and grant amounts. So for instance, I might think, okay, they're a good fit for me, but maybe they're not, but I want to consider other funders that are kind of connected to them or maybe similar. So the St. Paul Foundation, maybe someone to consider. The Frey Foundation, Donaldson Foundation, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota Foundation. Maybe you might be thinking, oh, I hadn't considered those. You already have 6 funders that you could potentially also explore from this profile. So I really like this feature and I think it can be useful. Sometimes though, you might feel like these organizations are similar in terms of their patterns of giving, but they're not necessarily connected to what I do. So, this is not always an exact match, but it is a helpful reference tool. And I think it's a great place as a next step. And then really exciting information, applications and RFPs. And so here they give you a list of information. They're not necessarily going to attach an RFP here ever because that's going to be rolling and they're going to and this organization might put that on their website. They might actually put out a call for RFPs, but it's good to give you a sense of what they're looking for. So foundation staff may seek additional information through telephone conversation or in-person site visits, which is great information to know so that you want to really prepare yourself. Am I available if indeed I apply and they want to have a site visit or follow up on the phone? They're going to do a preliminary screening and the trustees actually make the ultimate decision. So you may be working with a program officer, but it's ultimately the trustees that are making the decision here. And it says, see website for application form. So you don't want to stop here. You want to go to their website. And then they list all the things that you're going to be including and needing. If you've ever applied for grants, you know that you have to make sure you have all your ducks in a row and you have all the information you need. So this is a great idea to take a look at this to say, oh, okay, I have all these things ready to go, or I don't have everything ready to go. I'm going to go to their website and get more information. And they want your initial approach to be online, looking for copies of proposal. And they also tell you that the board is meeting monthly and deadlines. This is really helpful. September 25th, January 7th, 8th, and July 8th. And again, this may change from year to year, but because this organization has grants data from 2019, it's good to know that there is a deadline potentially approaching in September, but I'm going to go to their website for the most updated information. And here then, this is a really useful tool, useful feature as well. You have giving limitations. Sometimes depending on how optimistic or pessimistic you may feel, you may want to jump directly here to see, is this really a fit for me? So here we have information that giving is limited to organizations whose beneficiaries are residents of Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin, with preference given in those regions that are served by Bremer banks. So really interesting, even though they've given internationally and actually across the US, the organization right now is saying that their limitations are in these particular states. So if I happen to be doing the work in Minnesota, still applies North Dakota and Wisconsin. That's really going to be the focus. And then read the fine print and make sure that you read all the limitations. So they do not support specifically economic development or historic preservation, museums, interpretive centers, sporting activities. And unfortunately, they do not give grants to individuals or for endowment funds, medical research, professorships, annual fund drives, benefit events, camps, or artistic or media projects. This is really good information. So if I happen to be working in a museum, maybe my out of school time, after school time work was connected to a museum in some way, I probably am not a good fit here. Or if I'm looking to fund my annual fundraising fund drive this year or a benefit event, this is not the organization for me. Even though they fund in Minnesota and we work with kids. Maybe your project is really connected to, fundraising, and you may want to go a different route because this is a funder that's not for you. However, if you feel like, oh, I actually, I'm not limited by their limitations, I'm going to keep looking. So now we have the financial information and their total giving, total assets, total giving. And this is not necessarily connected just to my search. This is overall their total assets and total giving, which is really helpful information to us. And they also include that they award grants as well as loans and program related investments, so PRIs. So helpful for organizations that are maybe interested in that. And then this is another really interesting and cool feature of Foundation Directory Online. I mentioned before who's who. So you can actually see who has a LinkedIn profile and see if there's a connection here. And you can also expand if they include staff. So you can see there's a lot of people on the staff that have LinkedIn profiles. And, I would recommend not necessarily, LinkedIn messaging or connecting with the CEO or trustee, but maybe thinking, okay, a program officer, do your homework first. But it's a great way if you open up, if you have a LinkedIn profile, I encourage you to think about that. And you open up you connect and click on one of these different little icons, you can actually see, do I have any relationships? Maybe there's someone they can introduce you if that makes sense. And it's also really good to get a sense of that potential funder. Do your homework about program officers as well. And then we have communications. So we see that they've been pretty active as recently as March in terms of awarding grants. They've been featured in the news. Communication information is going to be highlighted here. And it's also going to be on their website and on their social media platforms if they're using social media. So don't limit yourself to just this communication information. You want to see where else they are. So if you go to their website, you look here and then follow up on their website, and you see, oh, they're on Twitter and Facebook and I'm interested in this funder, maybe I'm going to follow them so I could be in the loop and in the know. And then other information, and sometimes people don't scroll all the way to the bottom, but I encourage you to scroll all the way to the bottom, looking at publication information. It's really helpful to know how funders are talking about their work and if they've published anything recent, maybe they are leaders in a particular issue area. And so this will link you to Issue Lab, a service of Foundation Center and Candid. And it is a really great tool that you can see, what reports have they been published. It looks like that you can look at their annual reports. Most recently, they put out a report on how they are helping individuals and families navigate crisis. Really interesting. So do your homework, and you can really find out a lot more about the information of this funder. And since this is an organization that does site visits, they are going to want that, human connection, that in-person connection. And the more information that you have and research you've done about a particular funder, the better. And so I wanted to also highlight here, before we close out of the profile, that you might be wondering, okay, this is great. I'm using this database in one of our funding information networks, or perhaps you're in our New York library through Candid, and I want to send myself these results or save it. You can. So you can actually email yourself a PDF of this particular profile. You can also download a PDF. So if you happen to be using your own computer in a location where you can do that, you can download the results and email them to yourself, or save it onto USB or flash drive or something like that. And you could send yourself up to 10 complete funder profiles and also about 25 different records at a time. And so you can send yourself a lot of information. I wouldn't recommend any more than that because it is overwhelming. But if you see this organization, you think, oh, this is actually a really great fit for me, I don't want to forget about them, send yourself this information via email. It's a really wonderful tool for you to think about. And other things that I wanted to highlight, which aren't always visibly available, aren't always not visibly available. They're always visibly available. They're not always something that we think about. In our search criteria, things that you can also do is you can also do things like unclick your support strategy. You can also use the keyword search area. I would encourage you to be really cautious with keywords. So if you want to say, I want to see, have they mentioned something about animals. Like I really want to just, put that in there to see if that comes up. What it's going to do is only going to show you that string connected to that particular word that you typed in. So I encourage you, to use that with caution and not always jump to that keyword search, because you'll notice when I searched after school and children and health, I got more robust search criteria. And I'm going to actually take you back to additional, actually, I'm going to take you back to our original search criteria here. So if you remember, I searched health after school program for children in Minneapolis, but maybe I don't necessarily have the information that maybe I'm not necessarily sure of what I'm looking for. I want to do a search by organization or a search by person instead, not necessarily starting in that project-based search, although I think that is actually the best way to start. So starting with that project-based search in that way is a great fit. But if you want to search by organization, say, hey, I want to just search by just the name of an organization that someone mentioned. So I want to know a nonprofit that I've heard in the news. So I'm going to show you what you can do. So I might type in something like Candid, and you see, oh, okay, there's a Candid recipient in New York. I could actually search in that way and click on that and find out about this organization and how they've gotten funding. I can even type in, a funder that I've heard of. So maybe Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, see if they come up here. Yeah, and they do. They're a grant maker located in Princeton, New Jersey. And so I could type that in, search there. I could also search by a person. So maybe I met a funder, an event, or a program officer, and they said, hey, I work for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And you're like, oh, I want to look them up to see, what's their connection, because maybe I forgot what organization they work for, or I know a board member, I want to see their different connections. So, you could type in things like Bill Gates and see how, Bill Gates actually comes up here. And so this is a feature that can be really useful. So you can do that person searching or organization name. You don't always have to do that project-based search. There's a lot of fun things too you can do in the database. So if you want to kind of look at transaction type, you want to limit just the last year, you can play around with that. You can also play around with the grant amount. It's a really robust data tool where you can do this prospect research and really find a fit for yourself. So this is Foundation Directory Online in a nutshell. I'm going to jump back into our talking points so we can kind of think about, where do I access this great, amazing tool? So one, you can access this if you happen to be in the Northeast area. You can access this at our New York Candid library. It's a really beautiful space. You get support from librarians there, as well as staff. You can research as well. But if you're not located in New York, don't worry. We have over 400 plus funding information network partner locations. And so if you go to grantspace.org and you go to find us and type in your zip code, you can find the nearest location that has access to Foundation Directory Online. And they have trained staff available to support you. A lot of Candid staff are actually doing trainings at these locations, and these funding information network partners, some of them are training partners as well, are offering a lot of programs and services. So I would definitely find out who's in my backyard, where I can, who can support me, and where can I use this database at no cost. And last but not least, if you feel like, wow, this is really a robust tool, and I think my nonprofit organization needs to actually purchase a subscription, that's also a great way to go. With a subscription, you have a lot of additional features, and you can also, use it from the comfort of your home computer, your office computer. So there are many ways to access it. You don't have to have a subscription. We definitely encourage it if you think your organization could benefit from it. Multiple people can access the same account from an organization, and there's other ways of connecting. So you might also be asking, where can I get help with FDO? So I know where to access it, but who can help me? Great question. So you can actually teach yourself. So it's great that you're on this webinar today. We encourage you to use our online resources, but you can use FDO quick guides. There's lots of help articles available on our website, grantspace.org, and also Foundation Directory Online as well, has a lot of search articles and tools, and plenty of YouTube videos. So you might be wondering, oh, okay, how am I going to learn from YouTube video? YouTube videos, we have tons of them, and they show specific demos and search criteria. Or if you're having trouble kind of coming up with the results you want, or you forgot how to use something, it's a great feature. And also when you're within Foundation Directory Online, you can also chat with a live person as well if you happen to be using it. And I would encourage you, if you're in a location where you can talk to someone in person, either a librarian or staff member at Candid or at that different funding information network partner, I'd encourage you to get assistance in that way. So we have person-to-person assistance, library staff. We also encourage you to use the chat or email function that's available to connect with Candid staff regarding support for Foundation Directory Online. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to hand it back to Elizabeth to see if you have any burning questions that we can help you with before we end. So take it away, Elizabeth. Any questions from our audience?
Yes, we've had plenty of questions pouring in, so I'm going to go ahead and pose the first one for you because I think it might be a bit nuanced. So I want to give you a second to consider your response. So Noreen is joining us from New York City, and she wants to know if you recommend putting the specific borough you will be serving instead of just saying New York City. So I'm wondering how this might apply to other metro areas as well. I know you've done a lot of work in the Bay Area. Is this something that we want to say, San Francisco Bay Area, or do we need to specify, city and county? I know Atlanta is a very large area that we serve as well. So again, do we need to go city and county, or do we want to keep our searches fairly broad? I'll give you a second to consider your response because I do want to share some next steps with our participants as well. So we do invite you to continue learning with us. On August 22nd, we will have one of our returning presenters with us, Mandy Pierce, and she'll be speaking to how to create a healthy fundraising team and strategy so you can put safety nets in place to ensure organizations like yours can survive major transitions and achieve its long-term goals. Again, this will be taking place on August 22nd, and we'll be providing you with essential information so you can create a fundraising team that fosters community, collaboration, and innovation. We invite you to register sooner as opposed to later so you can take advantage of our early bird pricing for this course. And we also have our self-paced e-learning bundle here, Donor Cultivation, which helps you grow your donor engagement and retention strategy. This is a bundle of 3 self-paced e-learning courses at $145, which is a savings of 25% off the regular price. And you'll learn how to identify any mid-level donors that you might have and help stewardship strategies to move them into a major gifts program or a donor club. So back to you, Ganga. What are your recommendations? How specific should we get? Should we advise Noreen to specify the borough, or should we keep it a bit more general to New York City?
That's a great question. I would say do both. And excuse me, what I recommend, so being in Oakland, San Francisco, I might say something really specific like Oakland. However, if you make it too narrow, you may not find funders that say are supporting the New York area. So if I only write, click Oakland, I may be eliminating funders that say we fund in California, but they don't list their cities. So I would say try both, be as specific as possible. Sometimes when we are too specific within the database, we realize, oh, I didn't get a lot of results, or I got 0 results. It doesn't mean there's 0 funders for your work. It means that your search was too specific, so then you broaden it out. And so I would do both. You could say, I want to see who's funding in the Bronx, and I want to see who's funding in New York City, or I want to see who's funding in a broader area too. But start broad. I think that's the best practice within the database. Great question. Any other questions, Elizabeth, from the audience?
Yeah, we actually had an interesting one here regarding social media. So if we really wanted to leverage the who's function there, do you recommend connecting and linking and liking and interacting with your personal social media accounts, or should you keep those strictly to perhaps your organization's social media accounts? How friendly do we want to get here with potential funders?
Oh, this is a really great nuanced question. I would say it depends on your organization and your own comfort level. So if you do happen to have an organizational, say, LinkedIn profile or even other, social media profiles, you can connect in that way. However, the one-to-one connection can be really great. For instance, if you are the program development, the development coordinator at your organization and you want to reach out specifically to a program officer, that one-to-one direct connection can go a long way, because sometimes your organizational profile, so for instance, if I use, Candid's LinkedIn, excuse me, sorry about that, I'm recovering from a cold. If I use Candid's LinkedIn profile to connect with a funder, it feels kind of anonymous. So the more personal connection you can make, the better. But again, check with your organization what's the right approach and what's appropriate for your organization. And sometimes a funder does not necessarily want to be connecting with you through social media. So also be aware of that maybe they don't want to have that direct connection. They may refer you to someone else. And so it's kind of it's a nuanced dance, but I would say when possible, use your own account if you happen to be the lead for grants and fundraising in your organization. Great question.
Thank you, Ganga. We have another really great question that came in from Lauren here, and she wants to know if it's appropriate for you to sit down with perhaps a partner organization or someone that you've collaborated with from time to time and ask them who their funders are.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I really believe in the spirit of collaboration. So if you know an organization that you work with, or it's in your, same subject area, your same geographic region, I'd say reach out to them first. It's about relationships and networking and building those connections. However, I know sometimes it can feel like, oh, we're trying to steal your grants or information like that. So I wouldn't say your first connection that you make with them over coffee, say, can you give me all of your grants information? That is publicly available through the database, through Foundation Directory Online. You can always use that to say, oh, there's a nonprofit I know and I heard of them. Let me look in the database first. But reach out to them because they can do things beyond what you can find in the database, which means they can introduce you to a program officer. They can tell you how they made that approach. So maybe you see that they got a grant from this funder that you have been trying to cultivate and you just don't know how to go about it. They may reveal to you that they have actually been cultivating that relationship for the last 5 years and that it wasn't an overnight thing, and that maybe they can introduce you to help speed that process along. Or you might realize like you need to wait a little bit before you connect to that funder until you're actually ready in your program organization. So I'd say keep it appropriate. Don't let that be the first thing that you ask a nonprofit. But yes, collaboration is key and I highly encourage it. Great question.
Thank you so much, Ganga. We covered a lot of material today, and we want to say thank you so much for joining us during this webinar. Again, we have plenty of support for you. If you are your own learner, we do have plenty of help articles in that YouTube channel. And if you do like talking with a real person, I highly encourage you to reach out to our online librarians. I promise you they're real people who will research answers and support you all your way through your prospecting research. So with that, thank you so much, Ganga, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Rest assured that you will receive a follow-up email within the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to view recording of today's webinar, as well as a short survey. And I very much appreciate your feedback. I read every single response, so please, please, please help us get even better. On behalf of our team here at Candid and our presenter, thank you for joining us today. If you like this webinar, we hope you join us again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you all.